Що я пережив. Так, але тоді... Але як вони з цим, з дубляжом прокололися? Я, до речі, вам In July 5, Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum continues its operation. My name is Vasyl Samakholov, and now we will be talking about the pensions, whether it will be available to me when I make it to that age. So we will be talking about this with the people we have invited today to discuss this interesting matter. So it's Mariana Anufrik, expert at the ENS National Interest Advocacy Network, Alexander Indilko, chair of the expert group at the accumulative pension system at the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, Grigory Ovcharenko, head of the local asset management at ICU in Ukraine, head of the All Ukrainian Association of Non-State Pension Funds. What is NPF? It's Non-State Pension Funds. Yuri Handyshak, director of the Institute of Territories Development NGO, and Alexander Batli, expert at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting. So let's proceed in this sequence. Miss Mariana, can you please take the microphone? I know you all have the presentations and you're all ready to tell me whether I will ever have a pension one way or another. Good morning. Thank you. In fact, I was about to cover the topic related to European integration. It's probably one of the most important historic chances for the progress in the area of pensions and in country in general. So we need to understand what are the requirements of the European Union to Ukraine in terms of admission to European Union, and what are the best practices available in the European Union, so we can orient them. So if we check the recent research, for example, Alliance Company back in 2022, it's a very recent research. So they analyzed the pension systems not only of European Union but of all over the world. But in the first three places you can see Denmark, Netherlands, and Sweden, and they are followed within the top 20 by Norway, Finland, Germany, if I'm not mistaken, China. Yes, China, no matter how surprising it is, with a billion population, they managed to build the system which, according to the expert opinion, is one of the best in the world. So to understand why it's built that way, well, you asked not to mention the methodology, but there is something that we need to take into account when we build our new pension system, when we reform what is existing now. So we need to approach it more broadly than we think about the pension system. So we're talking about the level of life, the level of wealth. So it's about demography, it's about the healthcare and other public expenditure for the elderly. So there are three main indicators: basic conditions, resilience, and adequacy. It says about the amount of contribution, amount of payments, but they have a more broad outlook than we even think, and then we talk about the pension reform. Another index is the Mercer Institute, the Global Pension Index. So they've made their own thing. In this rating, Iceland is leading. In the first research, there was no Iceland. I don't know how they ended up there, but again, it's Finland, Sweden, Norway. They're all in top 10 of the countries where the pension system is one of the best. And again, methodology shows us again the adequacy and resilience or sustainability, but what's interesting, they take into account the integrity of the system, how well the regulation is built, how well the system is being communicated to the public, and even what is the cost of operational expenditure. So everything is being taken into account, how efficient it is. So what does the European Union require from us? There are two main directions. If we read through the reports that European Commission was preparing and presenting in Ukraine, specifically the one dated 1st February 2023 is about the system of social protection, where it's contemplated what are the parameters of the pension system, and Ukraine is not in full compliance with those standards. And another area is the movement of workforce. We see two directives here, and we understand it's very important in terms of European Union. When the borders are open, when people move and work in one country or another, it's important that the pensions are regulated on our end. And I want to say that in this context, there are no movements towards reformation. Unfortunately, there are two more issues related to the pension system in a more broad understanding. It's about regulation and monitoring. In the area of regulation and insurance, there are certain concerns that there is a low threshold of age and insurance track record, and it says that the people may end up on the brink of poverty upon the achievement of certain age. So if we analyze the countries which are in the rating of European Union in the top positions, that's a different material of organization for economic cooperation and development. We can see the joint thing that they have some built-in mechanisms of automatic correction. So what are we talking about here? That there is a number of such things, the contributions that are being accumulated, the conditional contributions, and there is dependency on the life expectancy, the dependence. So the longer the life expectancy, the pension age is being raised. Where it says A, it's automatic, and also there is a dependency, there is regulator which identifies that the amount of payment depends on GDP and the payments to pension fund, the contributions. So the countries have already built those regulators, so we don't have to invent anything new. And there are also balancing mechanisms such as a reserve fund that is existing in some countries. They create their reserve fund for this cases of catastrophes. So you see Netherlands, Finland, and Sweden, they use such reserve funds. I've taken the countries from the top 5. So those are the most advanced countries in all those ratings of the agencies. So they have those automatic mechanisms built in. However, back in 2023, the European Commission has prepared a broad strategy called The Future of Social Protection and Social State in the European Union, and it says about the pensions. And what's interesting, again, they see pensions as more broad system than we are used to talk about. For example, in the context of improvement of pensions, of its adequacy, of its sustainability, we have to reform the job market. So when the pension age is raised, the workplaces should be adapted for the people of higher age. You cannot just continue working like that. The market should be becoming more inclusive and more oriented for the people of older age, so they can work there. So what it means that if the family policy and policy for protection of children's rights is not being paid proper attention when children are raised in some institutions or in non-wealthy families. Their chances of worthy elderness are very low. So in the context of pension reform, they say that the policy of protection of children's rights and family policy should be protected, should be influenced. They pay a lot of attention to the residence matters. There is a fund of the social climate that has two fundamentals. The residences should be re-equipped in terms of energy efficiency, so it's cheaper, so that the elderly has less financial burden, so they have more resources. So you may have lower pension, but since you may be spending less on your life, you will have more of your savings retained by you. So this is the fund of social welfare. This is what it's called. So we're not only talking about the pensions, but the social services in the community as the life expectancy grows. And there is a lot about which is said about the trust of the government when when the system is changing in Ukraine and other countries of European Union, and it's about the fairness of pensions. Also, there is the strategy of European insurance organization for the years 23-26. It's in fact the regulator, and Ukraine, as it becomes a member of European Union, or maybe even earlier, should comply with the standards of that financial market in the context of regulation of insurance pension system. I'm not going to stop here, but it's a framework what we have to orient today already, obviously with the account of our context, our situation, but having not only today's legislative framework existing in the European Union, but also the strategies that they see, the most recent ones, and which are not yet implemented as legislation with them, but they are already implemented as the strategy. Well, so it's logical to proceed to Mr. Alexander, because what we've seen interesting here is that the Europeans think about these pensions more broadly than in terms of pension age. It contemplates a number of programs, and Ukraine, which is aspiring to European Union, are we going to move the same path? So please, good morning. I don't really know what was the research in the beginning of July, but it's an interesting date. I would like to greet all those involved in one way or another to the pension payments with the anniversary, because on the 9th of June year 2023 was a commemorative date for Ukraine, because the law on pensions was adopted, which defines that pension system that will live today, back in year 2003. So yeah, I thought it too. Have I said 2023? Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, because I thought like we're living in tomorrow. Yeah, so in fact, in a couple of days we will have the 20 years anniversary of that system that we live in today. And those are the laws that contemplate the solidary system first level, and then the savings-based retirement system. So when we say whether it's timely or non-timely to implement the savings-based retirement system, it looks surprising, because it was in fact implemented by the law 20 years ago. So in that same law, it's contemplated that starting from the 1st January 2019, the contributions start being paid to the savings-based retirement system. It's contemplated by the law. You may say there are no contributions, and I can say that the law 3668, which again was adopted on the 8th of July 2011, it says that 7 to 11% of the contributions are forwarded to the system of savings-based retirement. So again, it's surprising that the system is not yet in place. So let's get back to the presentation. A couple of indicators in our pension system. After the indexation of pensions as of the 1st April, the average amount was 5,238 hryvnias, and the half of the pensioners were receiving pensions in amount more than 4,000 hryvnias. It's a low level by European standards and is the smallest in European Union. The expenditures for pensions were a little bit more than 11%, which is not the highest indicator in Europe, but this indicator is higher than the average in Europe. So the pension system, the solidary pension system, works in a stable way. The pensions are being paid without interruptions and delays. The indexation is going on and the automatic services are being developed. So there are certain improvements in the pension system going on all the time, but at the same time we see certain shortcomings like disbalances between different categories of the pensioners, a lack of understanding of the way of pension calculations. But the key problem that we observe here is related to, we can check it here in this picture, and we see how the replacement rate was changing. It's a key indicator for the pension system because it demonstrates the level the people stay at after they stop working, so what they call retirement. And we see that within the last couple of years we were able to replace this coefficient of sustainability. Is around 30%, and the minimal required is 40, and the optimal is 60% if we take the European standards, for example. And there is a number of reasons why it was falling so catastrophically, but the key reason is that the number of working individuals falls more drastically compared to the growing number of pensioners. We were saying that it would be 1-to-1, so now we may say that this correlation is definitely 1-to-1, and it's not getting better. Well, given the demographic tendencies of today, the migration tendencies, most likely it would be difficult to improve this coefficient now. So now we're approaching to the matter that changing the coefficient by influencing the parameters in the system is difficult. For example, are we ready to make this number bigger? Are we ready to provide 5 to 10 million jobs right now? Are we ready to raise the pension age? No, I don't think so. Are we ready to increase the pension contributions 1.5 to 2 times? Well, it's less likely to happen. I remember the representatives of Bulgaria were coming last year, and they said, we asked, what is your correlation? They said, it's our key problem. We have 1.4. You see, 1.4, it's almost like 1.5, not like 1-to-1 like with us, and it was catastrophic. However, in other European countries it's different, it's like 2. So we understand that the solidarity system may be able to operate when we have like 2-to-1 relation, which is unachievable in our conditions actually. So this is why we stumble upon the next issues. We switch from savings-based retirement. So is it existing on the paper? Yeah, I think that if there is a list of laws, if you give it to an experienced accountant, they would find a way to pay the contribution. So we have to improve the solidarity system, but at the same time to implement the savings-based system. So talking about the solidarity system, we have to make it more transparent and also remove certain disbalances in amounts of pensions. There is a gap which is growing between different categories, and continue the automation of the processes and digitalization of the pension cases. But we understand that we cannot solve those issues with the improvement of solidarity system. So again, savings-based system is urgent. I'm not going to stop at the main advantages of such system, but the other thing I want to emphasize that it's not only about the pensions, it will cover all the areas of life, the jobs, the capital markets, the financial instruments, financial literacy. The same indicators will influence the solidarity system, and we will have more resources to increase the pensions in solidarity system. So is it timely or not? So let's look at the saving-based system, and let's not look at it as indexation. For example, here we raise pensions and we get more successful lives. So it's a long-term system. Its life cycle is longer than the life cycle of people themselves. So waiting for the time when it's more optimal, when it's best, maybe we will never make it by that time. So let's compare it to a child being born. If a family thinks for 20 years when is the best time to bear a child, most likely this family will have no continuation. So when we talk about the implementation, I would like to mention that it has a number of stages. We have to adopt the law, then there is a law to then there is a time to prepare the regulations. As international experts say, it takes 1.5 to 2 years. Then the beginning of payments, it takes a period from the small percent that is about to start growing. So it's the compound interest. First year is 1%, then second year is 2%, and so on and so forth. Then the establishment of the pension providers, the move of the financial markets, it's 10 years. What is 10 years? 10 years is 2 political cycles. It's some unpredictable changes in economy and in the society. So once again, we don't have to wait for some ethereal time that would allow us to implement it perfectly. The system should be developed, the law should be adopted, and then the resolution should be adopted based on the challenges existing for the time being. Obviously, we continue postponing it and getting back to its consideration of the laws. We have to take into account all the challenges that exist for the time being, just to negotiate the parametric changes of the contributions, the beginning of payments. So it would be logical to do it after the war, and stabilization of public finance. This is why the discussion should be going on not about the implementation of the savings-based pension system, but rather about professional parameters to make sure it starts operating. And those challenges that we're facing, first three are the risks that are present always. So in fact, we need to correct them, to manage them. They can be reduced or reduced to zero sometimes. And the latest two, what I would like to emphasize, we're not talking about replacement of the solidarity system, but we're talking about a system which would be additional to the solidary system and allow to stabilize it, because the savings-based system and the solidary system, it reacts differently to the social challenges, and thus it will ensure the stability of the pension system in its total, in its general. So waiting for the results, yes, to accumulate a worthy amount of pension, it requires time, but joining the payments from solidary and savings-based system, the effect can be obtained within 2 to 3 years upon the implementation. Yes, the percentage would be, the interest would be low, but again, people who will be at the age of 50, 55, they will see such results. So it's urgent, yes, and happy upcoming holiday, happy upcoming anniversary. Well, thank you. I think we should give the floor to the representatives of our business. Mr. Grigori may tell us, the question will be quite simple. Why all over the world the pension funds are reputed organizations that have a big place in the economy? They are trusted, they operate, they are visible, people invest money there. Why the system is not working so well in Ukraine? Well, there is a number of factors. Why more or less complicated tools were not so popular with us? I mean, comparing even to the deposits. And the main issue is the issue of financial literacy. For example, half of the population doesn't know what is compound interest, half of the population doesn't know about the existence of the financial instruments other than deposits, and it all suspends the development of the financial system. Apart from that, if we talk about the reformation and the development of other components of the pension system, savings-based pension system, the implementation of the mandatory saving-based system allows us to change the conditions of operation of other financial tools and to achieve certain rates of financial literacy. However, it's very good that I'm continuing to discuss whether it's urgent or not, because if we start talking about the complicated or complex reforms, and unfortunately pension reform in part of the implementation of the savings-based system is complex. It's so complex that many countries, when they understand the complexity of those systems, they start pondering whether it makes sense implementing it. So we're living in difficult conditions, in conditions of the war. These conditions exist not only for us, but for those pension systems where there is some physical activity, and the first threat, it's not the threat, but something that scares people away. Those who take part in implementation of that system is the inflation. Any savings-based system makes sense only when it can provide for procurement capacity. If it cannot, then it makes no sense. So what are we talking about? It's when our savings increase or outpace the level of inflation. So basically we have to create positive profitability, and the question is whether the savings-based system in Ukraine can cope with this challenge. So if we have this small anniversary, 20 years of the implementation of the law on launch of the savings-based system, let's see what would have happened if we had implemented the system 20 years ago, and see how the inflation has changed and the rates for the most common financial instrument, the deposits. So starting from the year 2003, when it could have theoretically be implemented, we had 3 cycles of inflation growth. One of them was related to the financial crisis, and two were related with aggression against Ukraine. We can see that inflation was very drastic 2 times, and the growth of deposit rates was growing more slowly, and those who work in the banking sector, they know that there is a certain lag. The banks make that resolution based on a number of factors: competition, regulation of the national bank. What we've seen the last year, the national bank with its regulations was trying to raise interest of the population in this instrument by raising the deposit rates, but we see it was happening slower than the inflation, and in those figures the inflation outraces the growth of deposit rates, and after the peak there is a long period when the rates are significantly higher than the inflation rate. It has economic sense. Nobody wants to save if the inflation is higher than the deposit rates. So getting back to the question whether we are approaching some period when we theoretically can implement the system, yes, I think we're at the peak of the inflation here. Behind the actions of the National Bank of Ukraine, we may expect lowering of the interest rates. So from this point of view, it's timely, yes. But what to do with the peaks? There are significant inflation peaks. Well, I have a question to you then. Well, peaks are peaks, but we had 10 years of good life. We had some deflation years. What were the obstacles to creation of the savings-based system as the banking product? You mentioned about the financial literacy. If people know about the loans, about the God forbid microloans, what was the obstacle to find out about such banking instrument? Why wasn't it created when the situation allowed it to do so? What do you mean? Well, for example, years 2005, 2006. Well, if we talk about the implementation of the savings-based system, I will get back to it within 2 slides. So about complexity. As to the peaks, the second thing, the critics and the blaming of the existing stock market, that there is no sufficient amount of tools that could outpace the inflation pace. Well, there are such tools. That's no secret, and there are like one peak within a cycle, but the demand creates proposition, and the Ministry of Finance and the National Bank, they say that if there is a demand of the tools tied to inflation, so we may organize an issue of the bonds tied to inflation, so Ukraine can cope with this challenge. But what we need for this is the implementation. Again, I want to draw your attention at another element. It's not the inflation which is physically painful, but the loss of savings. Many critics of the savings-based system, they reference the Eastern European countries, the Baltic countries. They implemented this system. They suspended the contributions. They reduced the contributions. It was in the beginning of the financial crisis when the stocks depreciated in the portfolios of the companies. This is the most painful for the participants, that when they lose part of their savings, those countries had no support of the savings-based system. When part of their savings depreciated, it in fact disappears. It makes no sense to support the continuation of contributions in the same amount, and certain part of those countries they suspended the contributions, or at certain stage they reduced it until better times. And the question is whether we in Ukraine can cope with this challenge. And here we just need to check from the point of view of the best expertise the launch of the savings-based system. Since the adoption of this program, they were investing in simple instruments like with the bonds, stocks, and I see that there is critic of these tools in this draft law, and the specialists of the stock market, they ask what are the assets that are comprised 80% of the bonds, of the internal bonds, and the answer is simple. Unlike the majority of those experts, the majority of Ukrainians don't understand, and the task of the saving-based system is to grow within 1 year or 2 or 3. And then, just like in Chile, we may disclose and add more risky assets to the portfolios. And then, as we see, the stocks may be added, the foreign stocks, and it's demonstrated as the best experience. I think Norway, yeah, the pension fund of Norway is reputed investor. Yes, we need a public support, a community support in case of implementation, because the system is complex. What we do within 20 years, I want to get back to a simple Ukrainian borscht. It's our national cuisine. There is a number of ingredients. Well, the beans are non-canonical there. So about the contributions, the taste of borscht, it depends on condition of its cooking. Within 15 minutes we have a short horizon. What's gonna happen next year? Well, it's the bonds. No, we don't need this reform. What happens next? No, this is non-existent. When, well, if one contribution is bad, 7% is too much bad again. So we cannot even start cooking it. So the systems don't work just like this in the world. Nobody builds Titanics because they perish. Everybody starts small projects and they see the discrepancies, just like Poland or Chile, they amend it and we just continue the discussion. Well, it's good we do it today. Okay, may I ask you the question then, one way or another, whose fault is it that the system was not launched? Was it the state which has not created the conditions, or financial institutions which did not create the financial tools, or non-conscious citizens who still cannot understand how they better pay their contributions? Well, it's the society which creates the conditions. Their rules are being adopted by those whom we delegate the rights to implement those rules. But I apologize, when the Minister of Social Policy says that our solidary system is the most sustainable, it can work for years and years, don't worry about savings, don't worry, but I'm worrying, yeah, I'm worrying too. We have to say direct to the people that we have to change, we have to create the conditions, we have to reform the protection system. It's the risk, but unfortunately the majority of the politicians, they don't understand how it works. Nobody wants to adopt those resolutions, and some experts unfortunately don't sort out the way the system works. They intimidate even the people's deputies. They say, but the inflation is high today. Oh, that's it. Okay, it's 1 is too little, 1% is too little. Nothing will work like this. We are short-sighted. We have short horizon. We are intimidated. But we have to implement the reforms. Sometimes they're painful, but we have to implement them. Okay, that's clear. So let's maybe give the floor to Mr. Yuri and then to Ms. Alexandra. I know that you had an experience of implementation of a complex reform of decentralization. So now let's talk. Oh, there is a clicker right there. You can take it. I'm not an adventurous person. I like the reforms where I can act as a mathematician. But let's not be adventurous. We were talking about Chile, but why don't we talk about years 2012? That their famous reform ended with the pension riots, and you know why? So imagine there is a simple thing. The year 82, it has started. What is the number of people paying? 40 years. 40 years. How many people is it distributed among? One. So the correlation of pairs between the pays is 40 to 1. And now, after those 40 years, those who started paying, they retire. So what will be the correlation? Well, the correlation is being stabilized in the best case scenario 2 to 1 or 1.4 to 1. Plus the depository shape. You know what is depository shape? It's stipulated by our legislation. If, for example, you retire and your pension is being calculated for, say, 18 years, and then you have a social worker coming to you and they say, sir, you live too long. That this is how it happened in Chile. And there was another thing that was documented by OECD, that they had those videos. There are the pensioners riding the boats with their rings on their fingers. Do you remember? Yeah, I still dream of it. Well, but unfortunately there are no miracles. There are no miracles, and when in the beginning the correlation was 40 to 1, those pension funds, they had a lot of money. They were living gorgeous lives, and then it went all the way down to zero, where when you start paying, people were expecting to be paid some huge amounts, and they were said, like, you were signing the agreements, you had options. So maybe it was the poor operation of the pension funds. No, it's the dead end, and this is now the World Bank now refuses to support the mandatory contribution system, and during the voluntary contribution the system, people take part in that system voluntarily. They undertake those risks in the voluntary manner, and the beneficiaries are the pension funds. And if they add the bonds, is the end of it, because even Karl Marx said that there is no added value created in the turnover. The bonds don't create added value. The bonds are only aimed at getting new money to service the debt, taking the money from the pension fund. This is a 100% adventure, and I'm not signing for it. So the first level is the solidary. When they say it's the word solidary, it means the system of funds movement. First you take it from the payers and then you give it to the pensioners. So after 40 years, any system transforms into a solidary system, and there is zero money in economy, and what is available is the system of pensions payment that is formulated in the following way. You just pay and the government doesn't let you die. And I agree it's a non-transparent complex formula, but we're talking about the results. 50% are insured of those who were supposed to be insured, not out of those who pay in relation to the pensioners, retirees. It's an indicator too, but the main indicator should be how many of those who are supposed to pay. So it's only a half of them, so there is no trust. And when the system becomes balanced in its insured part, when it amounts to 85%, so the success of reforms is in getting 85% minimum to pay, to contribute. And in the world, they say in those successful countries, in top 5 countries, it's 100% where everything is transparent. Everybody pays, in fact. So we have the situation even worse than it's described, I mean, after the war, because less than a half would pay, because only a half will be able to pay in relation to those who are the retirees. So let's see what we got here. Well, we all know the shortcomings. We've heard about it. One of the biggest discrepancies that we see, that the law contemplates that the private entrepreneurs pay as much as they want, but not lower than the minimal payments. For example, people make good money now and they retire and they have zero, but they were paying zero, and it's a big blow because the tax administration sees it if you pay more as an overpayment, and they tell me you have an overpayment, and I say I know the existing system and I want to have a good pension, so I pay as much as I can pay, and I will tell you even more, I invest way better if I would invest in the deposit. So let's see further. This is the life cycle. It would be normal if people, like back in 19th century, save for their pension. So this is the life cycle, the wage, this is the savings here is the peak, and at the age of 45-50 years, this is the biggest salary, and then the salary becomes like 20% less, and for the employer they are better than the 30 years old who have lower salaries. But people are afraid, they want to retire, which is catastrophic basically. And then look, when they live all the way until the actual age, this is how it's called according to the statistics, the average age of the retiree. Are, for us, the average life expectancy after retirement is 18 years, and for us it is good. We may implement the reform, because just like in Poland or Italy, the life expectancy may be 80 years. For them it's a catastrophe, because life expectancy after the pension is 29 years, and in our case it's 18, so we have time for the reform as long as the time is not catastrophic for us. So the area of S1 should be bigger than S2. If you pay with the treasure, all the treasures that you have is something that the families were saving for their pension without children, because all the families with the children were investing in their children. That's the principle of 3 generations. The children were taking care of their parents. Then, so the replacement coefficient is P to Z. The optimal is 40. We have 30. Why 30? Because it cannot be different actually. The replacement coefficient, no matter how big it is, you have 3 options. First, you reduce the pension age, so the S2 goes lower, then you increase the interest rate, and in our case, the employers pay, not the individuals. For them it's a tax. In 2016 there was a missionary, I think he has the finance somewhere, he reduced the joint social payment. No one went out of the shadow, but the pensions should be lower then, because the World Bank insisted on the potential balance. So potential balance is coefficient 0.3 instead of 0.5, and that graph you've demonstrated is correct in compliance with the law, but with the coefficient of 0.4 people burn the local council, and we have 0.3. It means that we will have the councils burned, we will have Sharis, we will have Lashenkos, because the pensions will be low. So we're on the phase of the catastrophe of the state as it is. Well, maybe it grows. You know, the replacement coefficient will be 0.3 anyway. So there are three options, and the third option is the subsidies. But 0.3 is bigger. Well, you are more or less right here. Why there are no big problems resulting from the crash of the savings system in Europe? Everybody is closing their eyes to that problem. Why? Because their salaries are high and their pensions are high. Even given the low replacement coefficient, they have higher pensions, but not in Chile. Their replacement coefficient is 0.2. If you had $4, 0.2 is 80. So yeah, it's a national project, so it's suspended. So this is the calculation of the price pensions. Everybody remembers it. What it really means, if we really adopt it as a law with a description of the formula, people can calculate their pension without the pension calculator. So reforming the closed pension system as it is now into a closed contribution and savings based system where people calculate their functions, where people calculate how much contributions they've made. They're interested in making bigger contributions when they have big money now. So reforming those things, we will be able to achieve coverage coefficient of 0.5. So that's the real reform, which is tied to the economy, which is savings based, and which is very, very risky. And now I'm telling you what to do with the savings based system. Well, it's the design here, you can read it, it would be posted. Motivation, necessary steps. First, brutization of salaries. What does it mean, brutization? Even this simple thing, they don't want to implement it. It means a very simple thing. It's not being accrued on the payment, but rather paid out of the salaries. And it says in your pay slip, like, this is how much is withheld for the pension, and now they said this is your salary and this is the taxation, so how much of those taxes were withheld from my pensions. So it's a simple step. The people will see what is the amount of their contribution to their future pensions. Then the next thing, the employer is now the insurer, and this responsibility should be vested in the government, and then the contribution should be based on the salaries. We will lobby it in the parliament if the joint social contribution will be zero, and the pensions would be zero too. So there is no connection, right? There is no connection. When there is a connection to the contributions, any such lobbyism, like let's decrease the interest, it would result in the immediate reaction, and the pension would be lower one way or another. So there is the immediate feedback, and it's easy to implement. There are no big things required here. The reform which is being proposed, it does not contemplate no single cent of investments, and the recoil due to the reduction of the load on the state budget, because state budget pays humongous subsidies to the pension fund, it's being relieved. proportionally to the decrease of the shadow market, and another position is due to the reduction of the joint social contribution. By the way, what is joint social contribution? How much of social contribution is channeled to the pension fund? Yeah, like 15%, 18.6%. I've managed to find out it from Capina, so it's manual management. You see, manual management. It's unacceptable totally, because those are public funds, and it's okay for the pension fund to manage it in manual mode, but the people should know how much they pay to the pension fund, how those contributions are transformed into the real money. What you said, there should be a joint system for the law enforcement and everybody, but there should be a bonus for those who did not steal, but that bonus would be additional at the expense of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and this is how it works in America. Their pension is not as high because their salaries cannot be very high, but if you have not stolen anything by your pension, you get a bonus. I think that this is a normal approach, right? Because now their approach is a little bit different to the pension system, and the minimal contributions for the private entrepreneurs should be set at the level of the joint tax, like 5%, and the pension would be okay, or at the level based on the average salary. And again, you would have the average pension not as good as you would like to for those who worked in the real sector, but again, it would be more or less worthy. And let me show you a couple of graphs to put a period in the end. It's for you. Look, this is the analysis of the 10 years of the different tools of savings, for savings. For example, you had 100 hryvnias back in 2010. What do they look like in year 2020? So the inflation 3.15, I think. Non-state pension funds 2.7. Lower than inflation. Well, your factors, they do influence, but consider one thing: when you want to play with the economy, every 20 years you have a global crisis, but you want it to last 40 years, so your savings will disappear for sure, right? But so somebody who is not literate enough, yeah, I'm not literate enough, let someone else deal with the savings-based system, but voluntary savings-based system. So when this graph right here that you see, non-state pension funds, when it will be at least above the deposit rates, I will start believing you. At least above deposit. Now it's below the inflation graph. I will start believing that we may launch something more serious because people will follow you. But again, if it's my system, look at the red graph. It's at 7. Within 10 years, those who were investing by the according to the Article 12 of the existing law on pensions, on voluntary contributions, those who were investing got 7 hryvnias per one hryvnia invested. Yes, so it's not your advice to invest in dollars. Well, it's grown a little bit compared to the deposit, but as to the rate of hryvnia, no. Look, we're talking about serious tools. Serious people are sitting here. By the way, behind those walls, people know how to calculate. Yes, their financial literacy is real good, in fact. The only thing I want to say that if we relieve all those burdens, if we make the conditional savings-based system, then the best instrument is the state pension fund. The state pension fund, because it's tied to the average salary, and the average salary is tied to the growth of GDP and the consumption consumption expenses, and it should be tied to the level of the inflation. We have a real market. People receive the frozen salaries, and pensions should be paid out of based on the inflation. You cannot give one group more privileges than the other. If the salaries grow, the real sector grows, the real withholdings grow. So only one parameter, that it's a conceptual error, because based on how you calculate the contributions, this is the way you can calculate it further on. This should be done, in fact. The reformation of the pension system now is not complicated. It's non-costly and is the repair and transformation just like other countries do it. And again, it's Ukrainian know-how that I propose to implement that does not exist. Yeah, we should make it providing floor to Miss Alexandra. Well, just tell us about your know-how, and then Miss Alexandra. Unfortunately, there is the principle of 3 generations working in Ukraine based on the amount of funds transmitted by the outside workers to their parents. Based on the mental and psychological specificities of life, you had very good graph of those life cycles. When the families are created, people think less about the pensions, just give the money for the children, something that was channeled at the pensions. Yes, the savings decrease, but with a high level of probability, those children will be supported by their children. When they get this money to support their kids, it's better for them rather than when they deduct it somewhere over there. It doesn't quite work for them. It's a risky position because it's been accompanied with the rate hike, because those who have no kids, they should come to 0.4, not 0.3, and 0.4 is 25%, not 18.6 as it is now. Those who have kids, it's minus 0.8 for every kid. If it's more than 3 kids, they go in minus, and that's it until they reach the age of 18. So based on that graph of the salaries that I have there, after they have educated their kids, after 18, they have the peak of their salary payments, and they catch up with what they had in the beginning. So they come to this indicator of 0.4. So this is something that was non-existent in Europe, where the gap between generations have happened, and it's felt now already. Well, thank you. Well, it's very comprehensive. Please, Miss Alexandra. It would be difficult to have this address after this emotional speech. Every speakers were saying it already, and my presentation will be of a summary nature, but with my personal relation, my personal opinion. It's important to say that the pension reform existed, just like speaker said, in a non-segregated form. It's an element of the system that is tied to the system, and a lot of other components depend on it. The pension reform requires specific calculations. Mr. Yuri said that it's mathematics, and the key parameter, we don't know it today, is our demography. Mr. Moderator said that we will have this situation and we pay 1 to 1, but is it really so? We don't really know. unfortunately, we don't even know what was the amount of population by 2022. We don't know the structure of population because the government was postponing the registration of the population, and it's surprising for us because the structure of population, the education potential, not only the pension reform but also the other reforms depend on it. We implemented some reforms randomly. The pension reform should be like this. It should be based on calculations. And for example, after the war, should we open the job markets for the migration workers? I know that the Ministry of Social Policy started developing this policy and it's in its inchoate phase, but when we talk about demographics, there are certain estimates what was the number of population, what was the amount of population before and after 22. Ms. Libanova says that their calculation of population as of the January 1st 2023 is from 28 to 32 million. 4 million is a huge gap. If it's a gap of capable population, it's very important, and right upon the victory we will have to have the population census, because we have to understand who are we doing this reform for, who is in Ukraine now. There is a huge number of people who have left Ukraine within the last year and a half, but many of them have returned, but we don't see it in figures because we don't have normal statistics. If it happens inside Ukraine, the movement of population, the internal migration, we will need this census and we need whom we do it for. So all the repairs of the pension system, all the repairs are necessary and all the reforms are necessary for us after the war, because we need to understand who will pay and for whom. So we mentioned that today 1 to 1 is the amount of active population of the to pensioners. It's those who pay contributions, because we pay the salaries in a non-formal mode. We pay those wages in envelopes. We have, and thus we have the high level of replacement coefficient. The private entrepreneurs pay it on the minimal level and they will be entitled to the social pensions or to minimal pensions. So it's the minimum pension that is being paid given the absence of the track record. So the budget will have financed it. So all those measures related to payment of joint tax, the measures taken for creating the jobs for the elderly, the inclusive workspaces. Unfortunately, after the war, even now, many people will be disabled. Ukraine is not created. There is no conditions created in Ukraine for such people, and we will have them coming in big numbers. And for what I know, the Ministry of Social Policy and about Ministry of Economy started talking about this integration of the veterans, integration of the disabled. And again, pension reform is not segregated, it's tied with other reforms, and we have to remember about it. We cannot take these steps in one sector only. So talking about the budget deficit in the pension fund is the black box now, because today there is a high level of transfer of state budget to the pension fund, but there is still a deficit in the solidarity system. But I need to mention that the last year, thanks to the payments of the military, we had no deficit. Part of the debt in front of the treasury was paid by the pension fund because there was no deficit there, but we have the budget subsidy related to the minimum pension, because the formula existing for many retirees, well, you get it below the minimum level, but the social standard is social standard, and this additional payment is a social component. It's not insurance, it's just a regular payment. There is insurance of the regular pensions, and the fund receives deductions. It's not inherent in the pension fund, but it still plays its role today. So before we analyze what is the problem with the state budget, we need to sort out what is with the transfers, what is the problem with the solidary level, the first level, what is the social component. There is no ready-made answer to this question, and today there is a very weak tie of the pension to the budget. Mr. Yuris mentioned it today. The pensions exist and we will have to reform them. There are different approaches. There is a professional teams approach, I mean the mine workers and other hazardous businesses, hazardous industries. There should be professional corporate funds financed by the employers, because it's the employers who don't invest money in the normal safe work conditions, and they should make additional payments to engage people, like, come work with me, I have hazardous conditions, but you will participate not only in solidary system but also professional. You will have special payments. Well, the special payments are paid to the retired government officials by the state. No. The calculation is made by the additional payments from this budget. But if we talk about the scientific workers, they have a specific formula, because they were paying not 2% but 3 to 4%. They had higher level of contribution, so it's not quite so. I'm saying that the people are irritated by the pensions of the retired judges, and when we talk about the military, we have a problem there, because the pensions are identified based on the level of the current salary of the military and the judges, because those judges who were working in a corrupted system, they continue working and making good money, receiving good salaries. And what's the problem with the military? The problem is that now our warriors, our defenders, it's not being increased as a salary, they raise it as additional payments, because if we raise that level, the retired military who used to work for KGB, they will have those higher pensions. So we have to break that cycle. But we have to have clear communication specifically for the military, because I don't want those military who defend Ukraine now to be affected. And we need a clear set of rules. It was mentioned today, one of the elements which influences the pension system is the macroeconomic instability. We don't have macroeconomic stability. There was a number of economic crises, two of which happened due to the war of Russia against Ukraine. We have the devaluation, inflation, the fall of GDP. It does not assist the reinforcement of the savings-based system. Even those who support it today, they recognize that it's a problem. But for example, National Bank has implemented the reformation of the banking sector. The system remains sustainable. It creates trust that we were mentioning today. Now the reformation of the insurance market is underway. Again, it's a savings-based approach, and the macro stability is very wonky, I would say. But the non-state pension funds, banking deposits, this is something that already exists. I just want to remind you of the period of the years 2005-2007, when the macroeconomic stability was resulting in economic growth. People started addressing the non-state pension funds to invest their money, because this is what Mr. Yuri said about Chile, but then people lost it and there is no trust anymore. And even regarding the stock market, what we were hearing today, even the discussion from those who say on behalf of the stock market, the experts who don't know it a lot, the discussion is about the hen and the egg. What was primary for me? The stock market should exist with some instruments so that the people were obliged to invest there. for those who participate in the stock market, they say we need money, and then we will have the tools developed, and then you will get it somewhere someday. But I know that the situation was when there was no investment market, but people had money and they overheated the real estate market. People were buying real estate, yes, but at the same time there were loans that could be obtained against that non-formal employment. For example, you cannot now take a loan in the bank and go to the stock market and buy some bonds or stock markets. Yeah, before the year 2008 there were bonds in the stock market and there were shares in the stock market. So real estate is a little bit different story. When the bank extends a loan to you, you say, okay, look, I have this white salary here, but my real salary is bigger, and you could get a loan against this promise. So you could not borrow money and spend it on the bonds or shares. So again, non-state pension funds, they invest money in bonds and bank deposits. I can do it by myself, in fact. And lately, even ICU facilitated the access to procurement of the bonds, and there is the investment company Univer, and they have the application which is user-friendly. So before the next slide, I need to say that there should be analysis of the market, analysis of the rights of investors, which are not existent now. The change of the monitoring system and the free movement of capital. You're reminded about the instruments of joint investments, the tools of joint investments. We have a gap here. The law dates years 2001. It was progressive back then, but it's non-existent now, and this non-existence results in absence of any opportunities for the job market. So low financial literacy of population is yet another item. We are really non-literate. Well, compound interest is very complicated. Many people don't know what are the bonds, and people ask, can we really buy them? What is the interest there? So yeah, they call their clients. You see the individuals. I didn't receive any single call ever. So financial literacy should be taught in schools. Financial literacy should be taught in the workplaces. There is the methodology. There is a guide developed. The communicating of the population of the on the pension. There is an account. I was asking my friends, nobody knows how to use it. Yeah, and there is a voluntary contribution, but I don't think that a lot of people pay those voluntary contributions. Yeah, in this account on the pension fund, you can see what is the amount of your pension, and there is a pension calculator, and you can actually invest in there. You can add. Yeah, but the idea is that it exists, but people don't use it. But as long as DIA is so popular, let's get it tied with DIA. The convenient applications to inform people on the possible investment options should exist. It would be convenient. We are all different. Everybody looks for their own product, and it's possible now. And to wrap it up, I would say that we need some social dialogue about the parameters of the pension system. Who is the payer? What the retirees get at the expense of the government? What should be the replacement coefficient, amount of pensions, retirement age, the participation on the third level pension system, and so on and so forth. Those are the issues that we need to be in dialogue about, and what's key is the communication from the government. Unfortunately, today the communication by the government is very weak, not only in pension system but generally. So this is where I wrap up. So I think that this is where we all wrap up. I want to thank all the panelists. The prospects are quite vague, but they may become clear. So this is where we wrap up this conversation. Thank you very much for your comprehensive presentations, and which allowed us to look at this problem from different angles, and we will continue our operation in half an hour, and we will talk about the Ukrainian Cossacks and how to tell it from Russian Cossacks. Thank you. See you shortly.